The story begins with the introduction of the main character, a black civil engineer whose name is James Harris. James is an unassuming individual, someone who blends into a crowd. He wears standard work clothes, drives a modest car, and leads a routine life that mirrors that of many working-class professionals. To the outside world, he's just another guy trying to make a living, trying to keep his head down and do his job. He doesn't flaunt wealth or success, nor does he seek the limelight. He's simply a man who takes pride in the work he does in construction, a field where his expertise is undeniable, yet often overshadowed by societal biases. James's life is far from extraordinary on the surface, but his experiences, particularly in his professional environment, are anything but ordinary. Throughout his career, he has faced countless moments of being underestimated, disregarded, and dismissed, simply because of his skin color. These moments, though seemingly small to others, weigh heavily on him. They are a constant reminder of the prejudice that pervades even the most professional spaces. Though outwardly composed, James harbors deep frustration with the racial biases he encounters. However, he does not voice these feelings openly. He is aware that in his line of work, as in many others, his race could be seen as a hindrance to his advancement. He has learned to navigate through these challenges with resilience, even though it's a daily struggle. His quiet perseverance has made him a reliable and well-respected engineer, but there's always the nagging feeling of being held back because of his race. James's story begins in the bustling city of Chicago, a city where diverse communities interact but where racial inequalities are deeply embedded. It is here that he encounters the subtle but persistent discrimination that colors many of his interactions. At work, he is often overlooked in meetings, where his ideas are dismissed by colleagues who do not value his input simply because they do not see him as an equal. The challenges he faces are not overt or violent but systemic, built into the very structures of the company and industry that employ him. James's day begins like any other. He arrives at his job site early, as he always does, and prepares to oversee the construction of a high-rise building that's part of a major redevelopment project. As the project manager, James has the technical skills and experience to make sure everything runs smoothly, but the rest of the team often doubts his authority, especially when the lead contractor, Steve Matthews, speaks over him or dismisses his instructions in front of the workers. Today, however, there's a new challenge on the horizon. James is set to meet with a potential business partner, David Jacobs, a prominent developer who's known for his influence in the industry. Jacobs has been looking for engineers to help with a major project in the city, and James hopes that this could be his big break, an opportunity to take on a larger role, expand his business, and prove his worth. However, as he prepares for this meeting, a small voice of doubt creeps into his mind. It's the same doubt he's lived with for years. As James enters the sleek, glass-walled office of Jacobs Construction, he's greeted by the receptionist and escorted to the conference room. Jacobs himself, a tall, confident man in his mid-40s, extends his hand in a firm handshake. At first, everything seems fine. They sit down, and the meeting begins on a positive note, with James presenting his plans and ideas for the project. However, as the conversation continues, James begins to notice subtle signs of disrespect. Jacobs's responses are curt, and he keeps glancing at James with a look that James has come to recognize all too well: skepticism. As James talks about his background and the projects he's worked on, Jacobs seems more focused on his own thoughts than on listening to what James is saying. At one point, Jacobs interrupts him to ask for clarification, only to turn to his assistant, a white man in his 30s, and ask him for the same information as if James hadn't just explained it. The dismissal is subtle but unmistakable. Jacobs doesn't treat James with the same level of respect he shows his white colleagues, and James feels it. This moment of condescension might seem insignificant to others, but to James, it's the culmination of a lifetime of small injustices. He has always been treated like he's not quite good enough, like he has to prove himself more than others simply because of the color of his skin. It's a constant battle he faces, not just in business but in everyday life. It's the unspoken rule that if you're black, you have to work harder, be smarter, and show more initiative than your white counterparts, all while remaining humble and patient. Despite the disrespect, James continues with the meeting, maintaining his composure and professionalism. He refuses to let Jacobs see how deeply the slight has affected him. But internally, the frustration is building. He has spent his entire life in this system, struggling to prove his worth, and yet here he is once again being treated like he's less than his peers. It feels like another stone in the path of a long and exhausting journey. Jacobs, however, does not let up. He continues to question James's plans, not out of genuine curiosity or concern but because of an underlying belief that James, because of his race, is not capable of handling a project of this magnitude. The more Jacobs questions him, the more James's frustration grows. It's not just the project that's at stake, it's his entire career, his dignity, and his very identity. The tipping point comes when Jacobs asks James if he has the necessary connections to handle such a large project, implying that James's network of colleagues and business partners might not be sufficient for the task. It's an insult, thinly veiled as a casual question, but to James, it's the final straw. This is the moment where everything changes. In the moment of this perceived insult, James's mind races. The question he always asked himself resurfaces: why do I have to keep proving myself? The internal conflict is palpable. He has two choices. He can leave the meeting, walk away with his pride intact, and accept that this is how it's always going to be, or he can stand up for himself, confront the issue head-on, and make Jacobs and the world see him for what he truly is. This is the defining moment for James. The tension is building, and James's next actions will be a turning point, not just in his career but in the way he sees himself in a world that has long treated him as inferior. James leaves the meeting feeling enraged but also deeply reflective. The encounter is a microcosm of the larger societal issue he has faced throughout his life. The subtle racism, the microaggressions, and the ongoing belief that he's not worthy of the same opportunities as his white counterparts are all too familiar. It's a system that has been in place for generations, and James is starting to feel the weight of it in ways he never has before. The racism he faces is not overt or violent, but it's a constant, insidious force that undermines his efforts and devalues his worth. Whether it's being passed over for promotions, having his ideas ignored in meetings, or being judged for his appearance rather than his abilities, James has had enough. The problem is much larger than Jacobs or any one individual. It's about the structures and systems in place that perpetuate inequality in the workplace, and James is determined to do something about it. The injustice James faces is more than just personal. It is a reflection of the larger social problems that Black people, particularly those in professional environments, must navigate every day. James realizes that it's time for him to act, not just for himself but for the countless others who experience the same discrimination. As James drives back to his office, he reflects on what just happened. He's angry, but there's also a sense of determination building inside him. He knows that this moment can't be the end. He can't let Jacobs, or anyone, treat him like he's less than he is. For too long he's remained quiet, just another person who takes the insults and moves on. But today something has shifted inside him. He is no longer willing to let this kind of injustice slide. There is a spark of change within James. Though he remains silent on the outside, inside he's plotting his next steps. The world may have underestimated him, but they have no idea what he's capable of. It's time for James to show the world that being underestimated, being overlooked, and being treated unfairly isn't going to hold him back any longer. After the meeting with David Jacobs, James feels a mixture of anger, humiliation, and confusion. The sting of the disrespect is still fresh, but it's not just the personal affront that bothers him. What weighs on him even more is the realization that this kind of treatment isn't just an isolated incident. It's a recurring pattern in his life. In every corner of his career, from client meetings to interactions with colleagues, James has been subjected to this quiet yet persistent form of racial discrimination. For the next few weeks, the tension continues to build. As James arrives at his job site each morning, he's greeted by the same cold indifference from his white colleagues. His ideas are still dismissed in meetings not because they're bad, but because he's seen as an outsider, an individual who, despite his qualifications, doesn't belong in the upper echelons of the construction industry. One afternoon, James is asked to attend a project meeting with senior engineers and project managers. It's a rare opportunity for him to present his proposal for a major construction project, something he has been working on for months. He knows that this could be his chance to prove himself, to show that his ideas are not just worthy but essential to the success of the project. However, as soon as he steps into the conference room, he senses that something is off. The atmosphere is noticeably tense, and the room goes quiet when he enters. The moment he begins presenting his proposal, the skepticism from the others is palpable. Steve Matthews, the lead contractor, interrupts him repeatedly, questioning his qualifications and mocking his suggestions. Despite James's calm demeanor and well-prepared arguments, Matthews continues to undermine him. The rest of the room remains silent, unwilling to speak up in James's defense. The humiliation in this moment is unbearable. It feels like a repeat of the many similar moments he's experienced before. No matter how hard he works, no matter how much effort he puts into each project, there will always be someone, often someone with less experience or ability, who dismisses him solely because of his race. This situation marks the point where James begins to feel that he can no longer remain passive. He has given so much of himself to this industry, yet his worth continues to be overlooked. As the meeting ends, James's mind races. He knows that his career has been defined by this struggle, by constantly fighting for recognition in a space that refuses to see his value. But the frustration and anger inside him are beginning to turn into something else, something more potent. The tipping point is near. James's growing frustration begins to manifest in subtle ways. His patience, which had always been a defining feature of his character, is starting to fray. In his interactions with others, his anger becomes more apparent. During a routine phone call with a colleague, when the individual on the other end dismisses his input yet again, James snaps. The calm, collected facade he's maintained for years cracks, and for the first time in a long time, he speaks out, telling his colleague exactly what he thinks about the systemic discrimination that plagues their industry. While the exchange is brief, it's a turning point for James. He realizes that the anger that has been simmering inside him for years has finally found its voice. He's tired of being patient. He's tired of letting the system dictate his value. The system is broken, and James is no longer willing to play by its rules. Despite this, he continues to keep his thoughts to himself at work, trying to focus on what he does best, his engineering work. But the discrimination and the systemic bias he faces are starting to feel like an insurmountable wall. He's constantly fighting, but the world around him refuses to change. The tipping point comes during a particularly frustrating meeting with his direct supervisor, Marcus Adams. Marcus, a man who has always shown a subtle form of patronizing encouragement, calls James into his office one morning. As usual, Marcus tries to downplay James's achievements, suggesting that he hasn't quite proven himself in the way that other engineers have. He goes on to suggest that James might want to tone it down in future meetings to avoid coming across as too aggressive. This comment strikes a nerve with James. He's always been professional, always been calm, but in that moment he realizes that Marcus's assessment isn't just about his work, it's about his race. It's about how he, as a black man, is expected to present himself in a way that doesn't threaten the established order. Marcus's words hang in the air, a stinging reminder that for all his hard work and accomplishments, James will always have to prove that he belongs in spaces where white professionals are assumed to belong by default. As James leaves Marcus's office, a sense of determination settles in. He can no longer remain silent. The more he thinks about the systemic biases he faces, the more he realizes that the problem isn't just about him. It's about all the other black professionals in his industry, all the people who have been treated with the same condescension and disrespect. In the following days, James starts to plan. He spends hours researching legal avenues, networking with others in his field, and reaching out to organizations that fight for racial equality in the workplace. He's not sure exactly what he's going to do, but he knows that change is coming, and he is no longer willing to wait for someone else to make it happen. His actions, however, do not go unnoticed. As James begins to take a more vocal stance on his rights and the systemic discrimination in his industry, rumors begin to spread. His colleagues begin to view him differently, not as the quiet, hard-working engineer but as someone who is questioning the very foundations of their workplace culture. Some are supportive, admiring his courage to speak out. Others are skeptical, worried about the potential consequences of rocking the boat. And a few, especially those in positions of power, view James's new assertiveness as a threat. Despite the mixed reactions, James's resolve only grows stronger. The more he learns about the inequalities within his industry, the more driven he becomes to make a change. He knows it won't be easy, and he knows he'll face pushback from those who benefit from the status quo. But he's no longer willing to accept the world as it is. He's ready to fight for the respect and recognition he deserves, and for the dignity of those who have been silenced for far too long. The tension continues to mount. As James prepares for another meeting with Jacobs, a meeting that could determine the future of his career, the weight of the situation presses down on him. He is no longer just trying to secure a business deal. He's fighting for something much bigger than himself. In this meeting, he plans to confront Jacobs head-on, to expose the inherent bias in their interactions and demand the respect he's earned. James is ready to make a stand, to refuse to accept the condescension and the systemic racism that has shaped his career. The time for silence is over. The narrative builds toward the moment where James's long-buried anger and frustration come to a head. It is no longer about securing a business deal, it's about reclaiming his dignity, his worth, and his place in an industry that has long denied him these things. The question is no longer if James will act, but how, and when the system will finally take notice. The moment of confrontation arrives. James has spent the last several weeks preparing, both mentally and strategically, for this key moment. He's been studying the biases in his industry, connecting with allies, and honing his argument. Today it's not just a meeting with David Jacobs. Today it's the moment when he will finally stand up for himself, no longer allowing his worth to be ignored or dismissed. As he walks into Jacobs's sleek, modern office, the air is thick with anticipation. The conversation starts like any other. Jacobs greets him and they sit down to discuss the business deal. But this time, James doesn't fall into the same routine. He's no longer the meek, quiet engineer eager for approval. Today he's a man on a mission, determined to take control of the narrative. James begins the conversation, presenting his proposal with a renewed sense of confidence. He's prepared to discuss the details of the project, its potential for success, its feasibility, and the innovative approaches he's implemented to ensure its success. But as he speaks, he can feel Jacobs's dismissive attitude creeping in once again. Jacobs asks pointed, disbelieving questions, and when James answers, there's a subtle undertone of mockery. But this time, James doesn't back down. He pauses, collects his thoughts, and then calmly addresses the underlying issue, the racial bias that has influenced his professional journey and his interactions with Jacobs. He begins by explaining how, over the years, he's encountered subtle and overt forms of discrimination within the construction industry. He speaks about the unfairness he's had to endure, not only in the workplace but also in the way his professional abilities have often been undervalued because of his race. Jacobs is taken aback. He wasn't expecting this level of confrontation. He tries to deflect, claiming that he's not a racist, and that James is simply being overly sensitive. But James is unwavering. He has had enough. He explains how the systematic racism he's faced has impeded his career growth, despite his skills, experience, and hard work. He reminds Jacobs that this isn't just his personal struggle. It's a widespread issue that affects many others in their industry. The room falls silent for a moment. Jacobs, who initially thought he could brush James off like everyone else, begins to feel the weight of James's words. It's a moment of reckoning, not just for Jacobs but for the entire industry that has allowed such discrimination to persist. James's calm yet firm stance, his refusal to be silenced any longer, forces Jacobs to confront the uncomfortable truth about the systemic bias that exists in the industry. This is the turning point, the climax of the story. The power dynamics are shifting. James has taken control of the situation. He's no longer the one who needs approval. He's the one demanding respect. After the confrontation, James leaves the meeting with a sense of quiet triumph. He knows that he's taken a risk. Challenging someone with as much power as Jacobs could have severe consequences. But he also knows that the moment was necessary. He has shed the weight of silence, the quiet acceptance of injustice, and replaced it with the weight of truth. And truth, no matter how uncomfortable, has a way of finding its way to the surface. The next few days are tense. James waits anxiously to see how Jacobs will respond to the challenge he's presented. Will Jacobs retaliate? Will he seek to undermine James's career, as so often happens to those who stand up against authority? Or will he recognize the validity of James's claims and the importance of addressing the systemic issues that plague their industry? In a surprising turn of events, Jacobs reaches out to James and invites him to a follow-up meeting. James is wary but he agrees. When they meet again, Jacobs doesn't offer a direct apology. Instead, he begins by acknowledging that the conversation they had was uncomfortable but necessary. He admits that, although he had never consciously considered how his actions might have been influenced by racial biases, James's words have forced him to reconsider his approach and attitude. Jacobs promises to take steps to address the diversity and inclusion issues within his company, though James knows that real change will take time. The meeting marks a significant shift in their relationship. Jacobs, who once saw James as just another minority in the workforce, now sees him as a valuable partner, someone whose expertise and perspective are essential to the future success of the industry. This new dynamic sets the stage for James to begin receiving the recognition and respect he's long deserved. James's victory isn't just personal, it's a win for all those who have faced similar discrimination in the workplace. His decision to speak out has opened the door for conversations about diversity, inclusion, and the importance of addressing bias within the industry. While it's just the beginning, the impact of James's courage will ripple through the construction world, sparking further discussions and hopefully long-term change. James's actions have a direct impact not just on Jacobs but on the entire industry. As word of his confrontation with Jacobs spreads, other professionals begin to take notice. Some offer their support, applauding his bravery in speaking out against an ingrained system of racial bias. Others, however, are not so supportive. Some of James's colleagues, especially those who have benefited from the status quo, begin to distance themselves from him, worried that his actions might lead to unwanted attention or even backlash. In a powerful moment of justice, James receives a call from one of his former colleagues, Tim, who had always kept his distance from James due to the uncomfortable nature of racial dynamics in their workplace. Tim confesses that he's been reflecting on his own role in the perpetuation of the system and admits that he didn't fully understand the struggles James faced until now. Tim expresses his regret for not standing up sooner and promises to be more active in fighting against the bias that permeates the industry. This moment of accountability, the acknowledgement of wrongs and the willingness to change, illustrates the power of James's actions. Through his courage, he has not only shifted the perception of Jacobs but has also inspired others to confront their own biases and take responsibility for the inequalities that persist within their professional environments. As James walks out of the office that day, he feels a sense of empowerment that he's never experienced before. For so long, he had been made to feel small, to feel as though he had to constantly prove himself. But now he knows his worth. He knows that his skills, his intellect, and his character are not defined by the color of his skin. He has fought for his place in the industry, and he has earned the respect he deserves. The final moments of the story show James walking into his office, where his colleagues now regard him with newfound respect. Some offer congratulations, others nod in acknowledgement. It's clear that, through his actions, James has not only changed his own trajectory but has made an indelible mark on the company and industry as a whole. But James knows that this victory isn't the end. The road to true equality is long, and while this is a significant step, it's just one battle in an ongoing fight. Yet for the first time in a long time, James feels hopeful. He knows that he's opened a door, and now it's time to walk through it, not just for himself, but for all those who have been silenced by the same system of injustice. The story ends with James reflecting on his journey. From a man who quietly accepted his role in a system that didn't see him as equal, to a man who now understands the power of his voice and his worth. He knows that change is possible, but it requires courage, persistence, and the willingness to speak out when others remain silent. James has become a symbol of empowerment, not just for Black professionals in the construction industry, but for anyone who has ever felt overlooked or underestimated. His journey is a testament to the fact that, no matter the obstacles, we all have the power to change the narrative and fight for the justice we deserve. The weeks following James's confrontation with David Jacobs are filled with both challenges and unexpected support. The business world can be a brutal place, especially when one steps out of line and challenges the status quo. James is prepared for some backlash, but what he didn't expect was the level of attention his actions would garner. Some of the executives and professionals within Jacobs Construction, as well as other key players in the industry, are uneasy. They feel threatened by the idea of a major shakeup in the way things have always been done. James's outspokenness has triggered a wave of conversations about race, privilege, and equality within the company, and for many, this level of transparency is uncomfortable. On the flip side, there are those who quietly express their admiration for James's courage. A group of young engineers who had often felt overlooked or undervalued reach out to James to thank him for speaking out on their behalf. They tell him that his bravery has given them the confidence to demand better treatment in their own careers. James finds solace in their messages, realizing that even if things don't change immediately, he has sparked a conversation that will continue to evolve. In a particularly revealing moment, James receives a call from his old mentor, a retired senior engineer who had long since left the industry. His mentor, who had always admired James's work but never fully understood the struggle he faced as a black professional, admits that he never realized how much discrimination James had experienced. He expresses his regret for not stepping up when he had the chance, promising that he will work toward being an ally to those who continue to face the same challenges. This acknowledgement, though bittersweet, is a small victory for James. It signals that the seeds of change are being planted, even if they are still in their infancy. The more people begin to understand the systemic racism that has held many professionals back, the closer they come to recognizing their own roles in perpetuating the cycle. James knew that challenging the corporate hierarchy would come with risks. But even as he gains the respect of some of his colleagues, there are those who view his actions as a direct threat to their own careers and positions. Jacobs, though he promised to address the diversity and inclusion issues within his company, is now caught between maintaining the company's profitability and appeasing the growing demands for equality. A series of boardroom meetings follow, with Jacobs and other executives discussing James's bold move. Some of them argue that his actions are a necessary step toward improving the company's image and ensuring its long-term success in a more diverse, inclusive world. Others, however, are more skeptical, seeing James's confrontation as a potential disruption that could alienate wealthy clients and stakeholders. One week, James finds himself invited to a private meeting with Jacobs and the senior leadership team. To his surprise, the mood is not hostile. Instead, Jacobs and a few other executives express an interest in exploring ways to integrate more diverse perspectives into the company's leadership structure. They begin to ask James for his ideas on how to create a more inclusive work environment, recognizing that his actions have illuminated gaps they had long overlooked. For James, this is a moment of validation. Not only has he stood up for himself, but he has also shifted the company's focus towards more equitable hiring practices and opportunities for underrepresented professionals. While it may take time for these changes to be fully implemented, the fact that the conversation is happening at all is a victory. However, not all the changes are immediate. The process is slow, and James knows that it will require constant vigilance. But he also understands that the fight for equality is ongoing. Even the smallest step forward is a step in the right direction. James's actions have caused ripples far beyond Jacobs' construction. His story is picked up by news outlets and industry publications. His courage has captured the attention of many, and soon his story becomes part of a larger conversation on race and equity within the professional world. Public figures, including activists and diversity experts, begin to reference James's stance as an example of what needs to change in industries across the country. In a particularly significant development, an influential construction industry association invites James to speak at their annual conference. His presence at the event is symbolic, representing not just one man's struggle, but the struggles of many who have been marginalized for far too long. As he addresses a crowd of industry leaders, James speaks candidly about the importance of creating spaces where all professionals, regardless of their race or background, are given equal opportunities to succeed. His speech is met with a standing ovation. It's a moment of collective reckoning for the industry, an acknowledgement that systemic racism and inequality are not isolated issues but deeply embedded within the structures that define professional spaces. In the quiet moments after the conference, James reflects on the journey he's been through. From the quiet, frustrated engineer who had accepted the harsh realities of racial bias, to the confident, outspoken advocate for change, James has undergone a profound transformation. He has not only taken control of his professional destiny but has also empowered others to follow suit. The road ahead is still uncertain. He knows that there will be more battles, more resistance, and more people who will try to silence him. But for the first time in his career, James feels like he's on the right side of history. His voice is powerful and he is no longer afraid to use it. James also recognizes that the changes he has initiated within his company and the industry are just the beginning. There are countless others who continue to suffer from the same biases he faced, and he remains committed to advocating for them. As he looks to the future, he knows that the fight for equity is far from over. But he also knows that the more people speak out and demand justice, the sooner real change will come. As the story draws to a close, James stands on the construction site of a new project he's managing, a project that has been awarded to his team in part because of the changes he's fought for within his company. As he looks out over the site, he sees the diversity within his team, men and women of different races, ethnicities, and backgrounds working together towards a common goal. This is the world James has always imagined, where everyone is valued for their contributions and not judged by the color of their skin. In the final moments, James reflects on his journey. He remembers the frustration he felt early on, the countless instances of discrimination, and the quiet moments of doubt that almost led him to give up. But he also remembers the feeling of standing up for what's right, of making a stand and refusing to let the system continue to oppress him. He knows that this battle is just one piece of a larger fight. But as he looks out at his team, he understands that change is possible. One voice can indeed make a difference, and his voice has changed not only his life but the lives of others around him. The story ends with James standing tall, a man who has fought for his rights, for justice, and for equality. And in doing so he has empowered others to do the same. The fight is far from over, but James knows that together they can make a difference.